This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Iran President Ahmadinejad says his country and other regional nations will never allow the United States to dominate the Middle East.
آمریکا میخواد بر خاورمیانه مسلط بشود، ملت ایران مانع است. دنیا بداند محال است ملت ایران و ملت‌های منطقه اجازه بدهند که آمریکا بر خاورمیانه مسلط بشود.
Ahmadinejad was addressing the crowds in the southern city of Shiraz. He rejected a year-end deadline set by the United States for Iran to accept a deal over its nuclear program. The president said Iran gave the parties in the nuclear talks an opportunity by declaring its readiness to purchase nuclear fuel. Iran has recently said it's ready for a nuclear fuel swap on its southern Kish Island for a research nuclear reactor in Tehran. The U.S. and its allies insist that Iran should ship its low-enriched uranium abroad for further enrichment. They've threatened Iran with further sanctions if it fails to do so. Ahmadinejad assured again that the Islamic Republic is by no means after nuclear bombs.
ما یه ملتی هستیم، ملت صادق و شجاع. همه حرفامون رو رک و راست میزنیم. ما به شما گفتیم چرخه سوخت رو راه میندازیم، راه انداختیم. به شما گفتیم تولید سوخت رو صنعتی میکنیم، صنعتی کردیم. به شما گفتیم از قطعنامه و تحریم نمیترسیم، نترسیدیم. به شما گفتیم نسل جدید سانتریفوژ ها رو به چرخه میاریم. بدانید اگر میخواستیم بمب بسازیم انقدر مردونگی و شجاعتشو داشتیم که بدون ترس از شما اعلام بکنیم که میخوایم بمب اتمی بسازیم.
Meanwhile, China has indicated that it will oppose fresh sanctions against Iran at the United Nations. The Chinese envoy to the UN Security Council has said dialogue is the only way to resolve disputes over Iran's nuclear program. Lo Yifan says doors to diplomacy are still open and that more time is needed for a breakthrough. China is a veto-wielding member of the Security Council, which can block efforts by the U.S., Britain, and France for more sanctions on Iran. Some Western countries accuse Tehran of pursuing a military nuclear program, but Iran, which is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, says its program is a peaceful scientific activity aimed at producing electricity. Well, the White House press secretary says the end of the year is the very real deadline for Iran to give up its uranium enrichment activities.
That is a very real deadline for the international community, and I think all of those involved in the P5+1 would encourage Iran to take that deadline as seriously as it's being taken by us, to live up to their responsibilities.
Gates said it's up to Iran to decide, and the international community will act accordingly. On Monday, the top U.S. military chief said his country should be ready for military operations against Iran. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said he preferred diplomacy in dealings with Iran, but he warned that force could be used as well. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which entitles the country to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Large crowds have gathered in the holy city of Qom, southwest of the Iranian capital Tehran, to protest insults against the sanctities of the Iranian nation. Now, the protesters say they will not tolerate insults against the country's leadership, especially in the holy month of Muharram. On Monday, the funeral procession held for Iranian cleric Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri was disrupted by a number of people shouting offensive slogans against top Iranian officials. Demonstrators in Qom are calling on the government to take action against those involved. Now, Saudi Arabia says its forces have suffered heavy casualties fighting Houthi fighters in northern Yemen. The Saudi Defense Ministry says 73 Saudis have been killed and 26 others have gone missing since fighting broke out on November the 3rd. It's not clear how many of the dead are missing were soldiers. Since November, Saudi forces have joined the Yemeni government in a battle against the Houthis based in the north. The fighters say Saudi warplanes have repeatedly pounded border villages inside Yemen, killing hundreds of civilians, among them women and children.
Tehran said that its forces' takeover of the Iraqi oil field of Feka was a mistake based on a misunderstanding. Tehran called on experts from the two countries to demarcate the border.
Iraqi Vice President Tariq al-Hashemi called on Iran to immediately withdraw its forces from the Feka oil field. Meanwhile, former security advisor Muwafaq al-Rubai demanded the crisis be resolved diplomatically.
The Iraqi flag is once again flying over oil field number 4 in Faka in Nisan, and the Iranian forces have left the area. However, removing the Iranian flag from the oil field and acknowledging that taking it over was a mistake based on misunderstanding were not enough to end the differences between the two countries.
A plan was put into place to solve the crisis by forming a committee to demarcate the border based on the 1975 agreement.
Iran's officials confirmed that its soldiers withdrew back to the Iranian territories, but according to local Iraqi sources, Iranian forces are still near the oil field inside Iraq.
Withdrawing the Iranian forces from the oil field and deploying them behind dirt barriers around the oil field is not enough. Also, taking down the Iranian flag is not enough. Iranian forces must immediately withdraw to the Iranian territories.
Contrary to Hashemi's statements, some Iraqi officials demanded the media stop fueling the crisis and escalating the situation.
I do not support the media which escalated the situation. I am also against political escalation. I support resolving the crisis calmly through diplomatic means.
The Iranian intrusion into Iraqi territory brought back the memory of the long history of border dispute between the two countries, which was one of the reasons behind the 8-year destructive war in the 1980s between Iraq and Iran. The Iranian decision to take over the oil field comes at a time when Iraq is making oil deals with Western oil companies. These companies can develop Iraq's resources to make it a first-rate oil-producing country. Perhaps Iran was sending a message, especially since the U.S. has increased its threats to impose more sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program by stopping its oil exports.
Discord over the proposed exchange deal for abducted IDF soldier Gilad Shalit centers on an undisclosed number of terrorists convicted on a range of infamous crimes. IBA's Aaron Viner brings us a look at 3 such men, including 2 terrorist masterminds interviewed in Israeli prison 2 years ago by Director of the Center for Near East Policy Research, David Badin.
Among the hundreds of prisoners demanded by the Hamas terror organization in exchange for the freedom of IDF soldier Gilad Shalit are several murderers convicted of notorious acts of terrorism. Abbas As-Said is an infamous killer who was convicted of ordering the May 2001 bombing of a Netanya mall that killed 5 and for masterminding the Passover massacre at the Park Hotel in Netanya, which left 30 Israeli civilians dead and 140 injured. Said was sentenced to serve 35 life terms for each murder victim, plus additional time for those who were wounded. He continued to boast of his actions when speaking to David Badin.
The mentality of Palestinians now see the martyrdom operation as altruistic action. For sure, they are heroes. We consider them as heroes, not only as Palestinians. They are being considered as heroes all over the Arabic and Islamic world.
Abdullah Barghouti was convicted of a series of terror attacks which caused the deaths of 66 civilians. He is currently serving 67 life sentences for his part in the suicide bombings at Jerusalem's Moment Cafe in 2002 and the Sabaro restaurant in 2001. Both venues were gutted by powerful detonations from bombs constructed by Barghouti.
I play the guitar. After that, I decide I will make bomb. But which way, I don't know. Because the first time, nobody tell me, nobody teach me, just to me. I make the stuff of the bombing. After that, I decide I will put it in the guitar, and I will forget the romantic way.
Would you like your child to blow himself up?
If there is a question, no problem. To play ballet, dancing ballet. This is what I sing to my little girl, 6 years. I tell her, you must learn how to dance ballet. But if there is a question, she will finish ballet, start to learn another thing.
As arch-terrorists, these men have become symbols of the Palestinian struggle, and it is difficult to imagine Hamas striking them from its release list. For IBA News, this is Aaron Viner.
More now on the drama of the day, and joining us in the studio is Ifat Raz, Gilad Shalit's cousin. Ifat, thank you for coming in on this very tense day for you and your family. You've known Gilad since, I guess, since the day he was born. The tension today has to be just enormous for you and your family.
Yes, it was very, very intensive and difficult day for the family. We've been in front of the Prime Minister's office since the morning, waiting to hear some good news. And we believe that this is a very crucial moment, that this is the moment when the government and the Prime Minister, this Prime Minister, need to decide if they will bring Gilad home to Mitzpeh Ilah or if they're going to lose him and his destiny will be like the destiny of Ron Arad.
Ifat, from what you know of Gilad, how do you think he is doing after more than 3.5 years in Hamas captivity?
I don't know. You know, we think about him all the time. We know that he's strong. We saw him on tape last October, but nobody promised us that he's alive, you know, today, next week, or next month. This is the Mediterranean. And we really, personally, I really hope that he doesn't hear all the argument about his release.
Unfortunately, as we know, it's been 3.5 years since Gilad was captured by Hamas. You've had a lot of time to think about this question. What do you say to those who argue that Israel releasing this maybe as many as 1,000 terrorists, many of whom have blood on their hands, Jewish blood on their hands, and may return to terrorism? How do you answer them when you're weighing that against the life of Gilad?
I understand, because it's a very difficult and complex question. But Gilad cannot take on his back all the Mediterranean problems and future. And our army is strong, our secret services are strong, and they're supposed to have the answer and to keep safe all the Israeli citizens.
Israel said it is not prepared to agree to all of Hamas's demands to exchange a captive Israeli soldier for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. A German mediator was supposed to convey Israel's latest response to Hamas, but postponed his travel till tomorrow because Israel wanted to modify its reply. Although Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said soldier Gilad Shalit's return home was Israel's priority, Israel was not prepared to pay any price, as he put it, for his freedom. Officials said Israel is intent on barring Palestinians convicted of killing Israelis from returning to the occupied West Bank, and that they might be sent instead to the Gaza Strip or foreign countries. Hamas had accepted that some released prisoners would be exiled, but wanted them to be able to choose their destinations. Israel has not officially announced if it dropped its opposition to freeing 20 senior activists whose release Hamas has demanded. Meanwhile, a report by human rights advocates said the international community has betrayed the people of Gaza by failing to end an Israeli blockade to allow the territory to be rebuilt. The report, issued by 16 rights groups, argued that Israel was in violation of international humanitarian law by enforcing a collective punishment with an indiscriminate blockade on Gaza. The report said that Israeli authorities have allowed only 41 truckloads of construction materials into Gaza since the end of its 3-week offensive last January. It also said that 90% of people in Gaza suffer power cuts daily, and poor water quality was a major concern for aid agencies. The report, produced by 16 international and Western European humanitarian and human rights groups, was released to coincide with the first anniversary of the Israeli offensive. The report's authors urged the European Union to take immediate action to secure the lifting of the blockade.
UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, one of the oldest UN agencies, celebrates its 60th anniversary. It was founded to help the Palestinians who left their land, and today it supports more than 4 million refugees in 5 countries. However, Israel accuses the agency of taking political positions, a claim that UNRWA denies.
The only hope for this generation of Palestinian refugees is right here, at school. The funding is mostly provided by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. For the past 60 years, many generations have completed their education in UNRWA schools, an achievement honored by a celebration at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. However, a festive mood was far removed from the celebration. UNRWA was established in 1949 to help thousands of Palestinian refugees who left their homes, or rather were made to leave but what has become known as Israel, during the Arab-Israeli War. The mission of the organization was to provide temporary housing while the Palestinians wait to go back home. This right of return has been recognized by UN resolutions. But 60 years have already passed and the refugee situation remains unchanged. Hossein Mansour is one of the refugees who grew up in an overcrowded refugee camp built by UNRWA. He studied in its schools and received aid from the UN agency after the death of his father. Today, he is the director of a special school for deaf children.
I think for every Palestinian refugee here, seeing the UNRWA flag or the headquarters of the agency is a reminder that he or she has been living without a state for over 60 years.
However, UNRWA is simply an organization that provides aid. Israel refuses to accept this fact and thinks that Arab states take advantage of the organization by using the issue of Palestinian refugees as a weapon in the political war waged against Israel, and that they use the UN as their center stage.
UNRWA receives annual support from the international community and from the General Assembly. The resolutions that put UNRWA at work were passed with the approval of Israel. By definition, it's a relief organization.
UNRWA denies having a political agenda, but it does take, occasionally, positions to counter Israeli policies. For example, in Gaza, the Israeli siege has cut off the city from aid.
We have 1 million refugees in Gaza. 80% of them rely on UNRWA, and we have to take a position on the collective punishment that has made life unstable. Let's be perfectly clear, this is not a humanitarian crisis caused by a natural catastrophe. This is a humanitarian crisis by choice. This is a political decision.
As long as the political crisis continues, UNRWA's work remains a necessity no one wishes to terminate, including the Israelis. But after 60 years of living away from their land, Palestinian refugees deem the creation of a state for them the only solution worthy of their approval.
المحكمة
The Iraqi High Criminal Court held today its first session in the case of the obliteration of secular parties by the former Iraqi regime. Secular leaders were pursued and killed by members of the former Iraqi regime.
Among the defendants standing trial in the case are Ali Hassan al-Majid, Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan, and Abed Hamid Mahmoud.
The crimes committed against the Iraqi people by former members of the Iraqi regime took place across the country. During the campaign, members of the Iraqi secular parties were targeted by the former Iraqi authorities.
The crime scene, the entire Iraqi state from its north to its south. The time, the years from 1980 to 1999. The crime, an elaborate scheme of assassinations, arrests, and seizures of assets of Iraqi Communist Party members and others, excluding the Baath Party.
During today's session, key defendants in the case tried to disrupt the court proceedings by introducing irrelevant arguments, with one objective in mind: to buy time.
You said that I could present my own argument.
Yes, but the court will decide when and how.
I listened to you until the end. Now it's your turn to hear me. You have to let me speak. We are living in a democratic era.
Yes, proceed.
One of the victims who gave testimony said that she was tortured by the tyrant regime.
I was tortured at the office of the security chief. I was tortured on the same day I was brought in. I was tortured by Security Chief Fauzi Takriti and his First Lieutenant Sami, who was from Ramadi. I was tortured on a daily basis. I was subjected to several methods of torture, including the half-hanging and the falaka, which is striking the feet with a painful stick. They also stripped me of my clothes. I was subjected to interrogations for 2 weeks. After questioning, I was transferred to the Hela police headquarters, where I spent 4 months in detention. I was released in lieu of bail. I was sentenced to 2 years in prison. I served my sentence at the Rashid prison.
The court session took place in a democratic environment, an environment defendants failed to provide victims during the tyrant's rule of Iraq. Mohammed Al-Kafaji, Iraqiya, Baghdad.
At the security level, a sticky car bomb exploded on the Muntai Airport Highway in Baghdad, martyring an Iraqi second lieutenant from the Criminal Investigation Division of the Ministry of Interior. In addition, another army officer was wounded in the blast. In Ninawi, a suicide bomber strapped with an explosive belt blew himself up, killing the head of the Telfir village council, Muhammad Ali Ikrish, and his companion.
Also at the security level, the Ministry of Interior's Quick Response Team has seized 200 missiles with various ranges in the province of Wasit. The missiles, which were seized in an area north of the province of Wasit, were being prepared to be used in terrorist attacks on the 10th of the Islamic month of Muharram. The commander of the Quick Response Team, Major Aziz Al-Amir, said that his forces have carried out raids in the county of Suwaira. Al-Amir further said that his division has received intelligence information that a terrorist group has acquired missiles to be used in the attacks on the eve of the 10th of Muharram.
The Sudanese government is set to work on a law that would clear the way for a referendum on the status of Abiye. The law would allow the residents of the region, including Arab and Southern tribes, the right to choose between belonging administratively to Northern or Southern Sudan. The South Sudan People's Liberation Movement, SPLM, rejected the law in its current form, whereas the government called on looking at the region beyond its oil reserves.
The Sudanese parliament paved the way for unity between North and South Sudan by agreeing on holding a poll on the status of the region of Abiye, a region that has been a focus of Western attention for its oil reserves and its strategic location in the middle of the important nation of Sudan for regional Arab and African issues. Representatives from the South were agreeable in their position towards Abiye. They saw the right to poll residents about the region's unification, either to the north or to the south, as a fundamental right of the southern Dinka tribe that is racially and religiously different from the north. Abiye's unification is a positive step that could facilitate dialogue and positive positions when the time comes to unite the entire South. This is how Abiye's representatives see things.
We say to our families in southern Sudan, stay with us in one dear country as dear citizens. All of us would enjoy the same rights and obligations. If you see things differently, then you are entitled to your opinion. We saw in the National Conference that the voter is anyone who cares about this region and all of its residents, from the Mizariya to the Dinka and all of the other citizens.
The People's Liberation Movement sees in holding a national referendum for the Abiye law a first step, but that the true test will be in the details.
The law that was proposed by us, the ministers, is a proposition for amending the law. We know that we have to hold a national referendum, and since it's national, the law will affect all of Sudan and represents the most dangerous stage in Sudan's history. In 2010, it will be the year of Sudan in excellence, regardless of whether or not the law passes.
The government, from its side, invited local and national parties not to look at the region on the basis of its oil. The session was over and a national referendum outline was set to determine the law to unify Abiye. It would also pave the way for a law to unify southern Sudan. According to the referendum, the law would poll all the citizens of Abiye, from the Mizariya tribe who represent the Arabs to the Dinka tribe. Amir El-Amin, El-Alam, Khartoum.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.